Hello warriors, Namaste, Namaskaram, Vanakkam, Sasyakal, and welcome to today's session of Crack Costing. We're here to revise the entire costing conceptually in less than 20 hours. I'm Tabish Hassan, a chartered accountant, all India ranker, international speaker, your friend, brother and guide, and today we're here to discuss the topics overheads and activity-based costing. First, let's look at how ICAI is asking questions from these chapters. On an average, there are 7 marks in every attempt from the chapter overheads, and from the chapter activity-based costing, there are questions of up to 10 marks on an average. Both combined together, we've got questions of up to 17 marks from both these chapters combined together. So undoubtedly, they fall in the A category chapters. First, we'll revise the chapter overheads and then go to the chapter activity-based costing. First, let's have an overview of all the topics in this chapter. First, we'll discuss the relevance of overheads. Why is it important? Next, we'll discuss the methods of charging overheads. We'll discuss the single rate or blanket rate method. We'll discuss the departmental rate method, and we'll also discuss activity-based costing. Then we'll discuss the 5-step process of getting the departmental rate. Then we'll discuss under and over absorption of overheads. So this way I have divided the entire chapter. So now let's get to the first topic, relevance of overheads. Suppose we are Xiaomi. We manufacture multiple products from mobiles, TV, earphones, air fillers, multiple products. But just for simplicity, I have taken that we manufacture mobiles and TV. That too, we have 2 models of mobiles, MI10, MI8, and we've got 2 TVs, TV1 and TV2. Okay, so these are the 4 products, and we want to calculate cost for these 4 products. So these 4 products are called cost objects. That is, objects for which cost is required to be calculated is called a cost object. Now let me just take MI10. So what all constitutes cost of MI10? We've got direct material, direct labor, direct expenses. This gives us the prime cost. Direct material. We have glass, we have got RAM, we've got chips. So all these things together, say for example, comes to 3,000 rupees. Then we've got the direct labor. We want labor to actually assemble them. Suppose their cost comes to 500 rupees. We also have the direct expenses, the Android or royalty paid to any others. So this comes to, say for example, 1,500. So the prime cost is 5,000 rupees. Just for simplicity, assume that Xiaomi doesn't want to earn any profit. It just wants to sell its product at its cost. So can it sell the mobile phone at the rate 5,000? Yes? No? The answer is no. Because there are other costs involved as well. Say for example, they've got a building and they have to pay rent for the building. They've got the electricity charges. They've got the advertisement charges. And so many other expenses. The above expenses, direct material, direct labor, direct expenses, we were in a position to give a one-to-one association of the cost to the cost object. If I'm manufacturing one phone, I want one piece of glass. I want one memory chip. But here, the rent, the electricity, the advertisement, we are not in a position to give a one-to-one association to the cost with the cost object. So all these indirect costs are called by the name overheads. So say for example, the total overheads comes to 10 crore rupees. So if Xiaomi doesn't want to earn any profit, still it cannot sell its goods at 5,000 rupees prime cost, because it has to give a share of this common cost to every product it is manufacturing. Is that fine? So there are certain issues in charging overheads. What are those? First, the amount of overheads is finalized at the end of the period. Say for example, this 10 crore rupees. This is the total of all the indirect expenses. But we cannot tell accurately what this cost would be at the beginning of the year. Say for example, we thought the rent would be 1 lakh per month into 12 months, it's 12 lakhs. But in between the year, we had to get another building for rent, wherein we are paying extra 75,000. So now it comes to 1.75 lakh into 12 months, which approximately comes somewhere to 21 lakhs. So the amount varies, and on the beginning of the year, we are not in a position to accurately tell what the total amount of overheads would be. That's the first issue. Second issue, even the output would not be final. We don't know in the upcoming year whether we'll manufacture 10,000 mobiles, 20,000 mobiles, 50,000 mobiles, or 1 lakh mobiles. So how do we allocate overheads to the cost objects? It is tricky. But is it required? Further, the fact that they are overheads, we cannot form a one-to-one correlation between the cost and the cost object. That's also an issue, because prime cost, say for example, I've bought the glass. So when I buy the glass, I know what the cost is. So when I use it to manufacture a mobile, I can tell it properly what the price of this glass would be. But overheads is not like that. It is a common cost. So we cannot accurately tell how much the cost would be on a per unit basis. That is the third issue. Fourth issue, to set the selling price, we want the cost, and we get the cost as prime cost plus overheads. So even though all these issues are there, still we have to distribute a portion of cost to every cost object. Say for example, you go to a shop. I'm the shopkeeper. You ask for a mobile. I tell, yes, all models of mobile are available. Which model do you want? We've got mobiles, we've got camera, whatever in the world you want, we've got it here. So you ask, what's the price of this mobile? Say for example, iPhone. So I tell, that I don't know. You ask, what? I tell, I know the prime cost, but overheads calculation can be made only at the end of the year. So next year I'll tell you the price. What would you do? You would go to the next shop, right? You might also think this person is mad. It is true that we won't get the amount of overheads at the beginning of the year. But still, to get the right selling price, we want the right cost. And to get the right cost, we want overheads. So we will have to estimate the amount of overheads with a reasonable certainty. This is called overhead absorption. So what is overhead absorption? It is the process of charging overheads to the job or batch or cost object. Suppose the total overheads is 1 crore. So I charge 100 rupees to manufacture a mobile. This process is called as overhead absorption. So how do we do this? Say for example, we have the total of overheads. Say rent, electricity, administration expense, everything combined together comes to, say for example, 10 crore. We divide the total overheads with a suitable basis. Say for example, the basis is the total amount of direct materials. So the amount of direct materials used is 100 crore. This gives us the overhead recovery rate, that is 10 crore divided by 100 crore is 0.1 per rupee of material. We can also write it as a percentage, that is 10 crore divided by 100 crore into 100, which gives us 10% of material cost. What do we do here? We don't know the amount of overheads with certainty, but we try to map it with some basis so that when this basis changes, accordingly overheads also changes as per that relation. So we set a standard predetermined relation. Based on that, based on whatever the basis happens in the year, the amount of overheads is also getting incurred. That's the way to estimate the amount of overheads. Say for example, in the given question, the prime cost was 5,000 rupees and overheads was 10% of material cost. Say 10% of material cost was 3,000, is 300 rupees. So we got the total cost as 5,000 plus 300, 5,300. So this, if we add the profit, we get a selling price. And that's what ultimately every business wants. They want to know the right cost to earn profit and accordingly determine their selling price. So this is why overheads is important. So now let's briefly discuss the overall picture of overheads. First, we have to get the total amount of overheads. Then we have to link the overhead with a suitable basis so that whenever the basis change, accordingly the overhead also changes. Then we have to get the overhead recovery rate. Overhead recovery rate is equal to overhead divided by basis. And based on that, we'll have to charge the overheads to the cost object. The basis generally used could be material cost, labor cost, prime cost, labor hours, or machine hours. Say for example, the overhead is 10 lakh and the material cost is say 1 crore. So how do we do it? 10 lakh divided by 1 crore rupees. So overhead is 0.1 per rupee of material. That's one form to write it. The other way is 10 lakh divided by 1 crore into 100. That is 10% of material cost. So whenever we have it in rupees, all these are in rupees. So we express it as dash per rupee, or we can write it as percentage of cost. When we have it in terms of hours, say 10 lakh divided by 1 lakh labor hours, we get it as rupee 10 per labor hour. So here we write it as amount per hour. This is an important observation. Now let's go deeper and discuss the different methods of charging overheads. So we've discussed the relevance of overheads. We've understood that prime cost can be ascertained on per unit basis, but overheads cannot. But we want the right cost to get the right selling price. So we'll have to distribute overheads on a logical basis. So what we do is we take the overheads, link it to a suitable basis. Based on that, get the overhead recovery rate, and this overhead recovery rate we charge to the cost object. So there are three methods of charging overheads. First is a single rate or blanket rate. Next we have the departmental rate, and then we have activity based costing. Let's have a look at all the three methods. The single rate or blanket rate. Here we take only one basis to distribute the entire overheads. To take the entire company, say Xiaomi company as a whole has 10 crores of overheads. All departments together, all activities together, the entire overheads comes to 10 crore rupees. So we take the total overheads of the company divided by a suitable basis. We take a single basis. So that's why it's called single rate. Suppose we take it as a percentage of material cost. We take the basis as material cost. So the material cost incurred is 100 crores. So we get 10 crore divided by 100 crore is 0.1 per rupee of material. This is per rupee of material, or we can also tell it as 10 crore by 100 crore into 100, which gives us 10% of material cost. The basis here would generally be either material cost, labor cost, prime cost, labor hours, or machine hours. It would generally be given in the question. So now we got the overhead recovery rate as 0.1 per rupee of material. What do we do with this? So we knew the prime cost. The prime cost was rupees 5,000. Now we have to add overheads. So how do we add overheads? It is 0.1 per rupee of material into the cost of direct material was 3,000, which gives us 300. So 5,000 plus 300 gives us the total cost of 5,300. We add profit, and that's how we get selling price. This is the single rate or blanket rate method. Very simple. The special features of this method are, firstly, we take the total overheads of the company. That is the total overheads across all departments, across all activities. We just take that total single figure, and then we just take a single basis to distribute the entire overheads of the company. This is single rate method. Next, we have the departmental rate method. What does departmental rate method tell? And why it has come when we already had the single rate method? So departmental rate method tells, okay, you have the total overheads of the company. Now distribute this total overheads amongst the different departments in the organization. Why is it important? I'll give you an example. Suppose Xiaomi manufactures mobiles and earphones. The total overheads incurred in the year are 10 crore. In this 10 crore, a majority of overhead was incurred in the software department. Say for example, 7 crore. And the balance, all departments together, had an overhead of 3 crores. So this is how we had the 10 crore. To manufacture an earphone, we don't want any software. To manufacture a basic earphone, we don't want any software. But still, when we had a blanket rate method, what we used to do was, we used to take the total overheads of the company. It also included overheads of software department, divide it by a basis. We got the overhead recovery rate. So when we were distributing overhead to the cost object, even for mobiles, the software cost was being distributed. Even for earphone, even though it did not take any service, its cost was being distributed. But now, what we have done is, the total overheads of the company, we have split it between the departments. And then, for every department, we take a suitable basis. So we get the overhead recovery rate. So we've got the overhead recovery rate. Now we'll take the cost object. So if the cost object, say for example, mobile, it uses services of the department, we charge. If it does not use service of that department, we don't charge. As simple as that. Say for example, software department. Mobile uses the service of software department. So we charge overheads. But earphones does not use. So we are not charging it. That's how departmental rate method works. Say for example, we have the total departmental overheads distributed as 1 crore, 5 crore, 10 crore, and so on. We should also do the reapportionment of service department overheads. Why it is done, how it is done, we'll discuss it later. But what it does is, it nullifies the entire overheads incurred in service department and transfers that overhead from service department to the production department. Based on this, we get the total overheads for the production department. We divide it by a basis. So we get the overhead recovery rate. Say for example, the overhead recovery rate here is rupees 500 per labor hour here it is 0.9 per rupee of material, and here it is 0.2 per labor cost. So now we've got two products. One is a mobile, the other is air filler or the earphones. Assume the amount of direct material, direct labor, direct expense is the same. So the prime cost is 5,000. Now we have to add overheads. Overheads in the software department. Mobile uses the service of software department, so we distribute it here. But air filler does not use the services, so we do not distribute. Again, the service of hardware department are used by both mobile and air filler, so we distribute it to both. Assembly, mobile uses the service of assembly department, but air filler does not. So this gives us a better picture of cost, and if we have a better picture of cost, it obviously helps us to set the better selling price to earn profit. That's what ultimately the objective of each business is. So why is it better than a single rate method? Firstly, we are not using the total overheads of the organization. We are distributing the total overheads amongst the different departments. Secondly, we are not taking a single basis. For every department, we are taking a basis. This helps us better correlate the cost with the cost object. So this is departmental rate method. Now we have activity-based costing. So single rate method, we use the total overheads of organization. Departmental rate method, the total overheads, we bifurcated amongst the departments. Activity-based costing, we further bifurcate the total overheads of the company amongst the different activities. Say for example, in a company, the total overhead is 10 crore. We have the total of 5 departments. And then we undertake a total of 100 activities. So in single rate method, we only take the total overheads. In departmental rate method, we take the 5 divisions. In activity-based costing, we take the 100 activities. So what it tells is, cost is incurred based on the activities we do in an organization. So try to correlate the total overhead cost with the relevant activity which drives the cost. Say for example, we have ordering cost. Say for example, ordering cost is 50 lakh. What is this cost based on? This cost is incurred every time we place an order. So it is based on number of orders placed. Say for example, number of orders placed is 10,000. So we get it as 50 lakh by 10,000, say 500 per order. Similarly, we have the machine setup cost. Say for example, its cost comes to 1 crore, and in a year we've done 10 lakh machine setups. So it comes to rupees 10 per machine setup. So what we do is, we take the total cost of the activity, we divide it by a suitable basis which drives the cost of the activity to get the activity cost driver rate. And now what we do, suppose we are manufacturing MI10 phone. So we already have the prime cost at 5,000 rupees. Now we have to add the overheads. We know that the ordering cost is 500 per order. Say for example, in a year we've placed 250 orders, which comes to 1.25 lakh. And then we've set up the machines. We've set up the machine 1 lakh times in the year. That comes to 1 lakh into 10 lakh rupees. So the total overhead for the year for MI10 would be 11.25 lakh. Say for example, we've manufactured 1 lakh mobiles in the year. We get the overhead cost per unit of mobile at rupees 11.25. So this gives us even better idea of the overheads. So always activity-based costing is better than departmental rate and single rate. Departmental rate is better than single rate. So what we do in single rate is we take total overheads divided by a basis. In departmental rate, the total overheads of the company we distribute amongst different departments, and for every department we take a suitable basis and then charge that overheads to the cost object. In activity-based costing, the total overhead, we distribute it amongst different activities, and for every activity, we choose a relevant basis, and based on that, we charge the overheads to the cost object. We have three different overheads, that is factory overheads, administration overheads, and selling and distribution overheads. Generally, for administration overheads and selling and distribution overheads, they are very simple. So we generally use the single rate or blanket rate method to distribute overheads in the selling and administration department. But factory overheads, they are complex. They involve so many activities, so many different departments. So generally, we can choose any of the three, either the single rate method or the departmental rate method or the activity-based costing. Which method to choose depends on two factors. First is how much cost they have. Second is with what accuracy they want to charge the overheads. If you have less cost, you'll prefer single rate method because it's very simple. But if you have more cost, you're ready to maintain in detailed data records activity wise, then you can go for activity based costing. Another factor is how much we want the overhead cost to be as close to the actual cost. So if you want greater accuracy, we go for activity based costing. If you don't want so much of accuracy, we can go for single rate method. That's how we choose between the three different methods of distribution of overheads. That's the second topic. So there's nothing to be done in the single rate or blanket rate method. Question will give us the total overhead. Question will also give us the basis. So we just need to divide it and charge it to the cost object. So it's generally not asked in the exams. Activity based costing. We've got a separate chapter, the next chapter, to discuss activity based costing in detail. Now we are left with the departmental rate method. How do we charge overheads to the cost object based on the departmental rate method? We'll discuss it in the next topic. So the departmental rate method. Again, the objective is simple. We've got the overhead. We have to charge the overheads to the cost object. So we do that using, we first calculate the overhead recovery rate, and based on that, charge overhead to the cost object. In single rate method, what we used to do was, we used to take the total overheads of the company, divide it by a basis, we would get overhead recovery rate, and based on this, we would charge the overheads to the cost object. But we tell, instead of taking total overheads, take the overhead department wise. So we get overhead department wise. Say for example, total overhead of the company is 10 crore. We get it as production department 1 overhead as 5 crore. P2 is 3 crore. P3 is 2 crore. And next the steps is same. Once we got the total overheads, link it to a suitable basis, get the overhead recovery rate, and then charge the overheads to the cost object. The main thing is, how do we get the total overheads for every department? We'll have to follow 3 steps, and at the end of 3 steps, we'll get the total overhead for every department. First is allocation, second is apportionment, third is reapportionment. Just to explain it very simple, allocation is when the cost is directly incurred for the department. Apportionment is when we have common cost and we have to distribute it on a logical basis to all the departments. And reapportionment is when we have the cost in service department and that we have to redistribute to the production department. Why we do it, we'll discuss it later. But if we get all these 3, we add it, we get the total overheads for every production department. We divide it by a basis, we get the overhead recovery rate, and then based on the overhead recovery rate, we charge overheads to the cost object. So all in all, we have 5 steps in the departmental rate method. First is allocation of overheads. Next is apportionment of overheads. Next is reapportionment of service department overheads to the production department. With this, we get the total overheads in every production department. Then we divide it by a suitable basis, we get the overhead recovery rate. And based on the overhead recovery rate, we charge overheads to the cost object. So these are the 5 steps in departmental rate method: allocation, apportionment, reapportionment, overhead recovery rate, and charging the overheads to the cost object. So how do you do it? We do allocation, apportionment, reapportionment. This gives us total overhead. We divide by a suitable basis, we get overhead recovery rate. This is the format in which we solve questions in exams. We write the particulars, total overheads, we write the basis on which this is distributed amongst departments, and then we have the production department and service department. I've just taken a simple example of Xiaomi, assuming it manufactures only mobiles. So we have in the production department hardware, software, and assembly, and in service department we have taken repairs and maintenance and HR. So in allocation, what we do is we've got the direct cost, we distribute it to all departments. Apportionment, it will not be directly available, but based on a relevant basis, we distribute it to all departments. Okay. So what do we do in reapportionment? The entire service cost, we transfer it to the production departments. So by the end of it, service cost becomes nil, and this would get added in the production department. So based on this, we get the total overhead. We divide by a suitable basis, we get the overhead recovery rate. And the overhead recovery rate, we charge it to the cost object and get the total overheads. We already have prime cost, we add overheads, we get the total cost. Based on that, we decide the selling price. Okay. So first, allocation. What is allocation and when it is used? Here, we charge overheads of the respective department to the respective department. Say for example, there is one supervisor in assembly department. So we pay him 1.2 lakh per annum. So we know this 1.2 lakh per annum cost incurred is only for one department. The amount can be certainly ascertained for that single department. So when we can ascertain it with certainty, and when we know specifically it is linked only to one department, we use allocation. Or say for example, there is a depreciation of machine in hardware department. So we know it is a machine of hardware department, so it is used only in hardware department, and the depreciation is also directly attributable to hardware department only. Or say for example, for assembly we have taken a separate building, so we pay rent for that. That is also specifically linked to that department alone. So this is what allocation is. It is again easy. Question would itself specify what the amount is to which department it has to be allocated. Next comes apportionment. So what do we do in apportionment? We distribute common cost to the departments on a suitable basis. So what is it? In allocation, I told that for assembly we've got a separate building. So we are paying rent for that building, that would be directly charged to the assembly department. But now we have a common building. We use it for hardware, we use it for software, we use it for human HR, we use it for repairs and maintenance. So the same building, say for example, we are paying the rent of 4 lakh per month. We are using it for 4 different departments. Now, how do we distribute it amongst the departments? We take a suitable basis. Say for example, we can distribute it based on floor area. This is called apportionment. In allocation, we directly know what the amount to the department is. In apportionment, we won't be knowing. It would be common cost incurred for more than one department. So what we do is we take a suitable basis, based on that distribute it amongst the different departments. Say for example, in this building, we are also having the electricity cost. An electricity bill we are getting on total basis for all 4 departments together. So how do we distribute it? We can distribute it based on the number of light points. Again, on what basis to apportion the cost? Data would be given in question, and we have to use common sense to apportion it properly. That's what is apportionment. So allocation plus apportionment together is called as primary distribution. Okay. Say for example, the total overheads of the company is 10 crore. After allocation and apportionment, we get the gross department wise overhead rate. So we get for P1 as 2 crore, P2 as 3 crore, P3 as 2 crore, and service department 1 as 2 crore and service department 2 as 1 crore. So we match the total overhead with the department wise overhead. This is the primary distribution. Reapportionment is also called as secondary distribution. What we do in reapportionment, we have the total department wise cost for service department. We eliminate it from there and charge it to the production department. By the end of reapportionment, the department wise overhead of the service department becomes nil, and that would also be transferred to the production department. But an important question, why is it required? Why is reapportionment required? Say for example, we have repairs and maintenance. We are making repairs and maintenance of a machine. So we have incurred in repairs and maintenance, say we have incurred the total overheads of 2 crore rupees. So in this, we know the hardware department has asked for repairs 10 times. The software department has asked for repairs of machine, say 15 times, and the assembly department has asked for repairs of machine 25 times. Say for example, we are manufacturing MI10. We don't know specifically for this product how many times we have done the repairs and maintenance, but we know in the hardware department we've done the repairs 10 times. In the software department, we've done it 15 times. In the assembly department, we've done it 25 times. So what we do is, from the service department to the cost object, there is no direct relation. So what we do is, from the service department, we transfer it to the production department, because there is a direct relationship between the production department and service department. And from the production department, there is a direct link from the production department to the cost object. So from production department, we transfer the cost ultimately to the cost object. So that's what we do, and that's why reapportionment of service department overheads to the production department is necessary. I'll give you another example. Say canteen. It's a service department because ultimately it does not directly contribute to manufacturing of goods or service. So employees across the organization use the service of canteen. Okay, there are employees in assembly, there are employees in hardware, there are employees in software, and there are employees in repairs and maintenance, there are employees in HR. Everybody uses the service of canteen. Okay. And if you want to know the cost of canteen services specifically to MI10, we would not be in a position to directly attribute it. Why? Because to manufacture MI10, we want assembly workers, we want hardware workers, we want software workers. We take the service of repairs and maintenance and everything. So that's why what we do is, this canteen cost, we first distribute it to all the production departments. And from here, we charge it to the cost object. So what we do is, the service department overhead, we first transfer it to the production department. From the production department, based on the overhead recovery rate, we transfer it to the cost object. So there are 3 ways of reapportionment of overheads. So the end result of reapportionment is that the overhead at service department becomes 0 and the entire amount is transferred to the production department. So there are 3 ways of reapportionment of overheads. First is direct redistribution, second is stepladder or non-reciprocal, and third is reciprocal. So what is direct redistribution? So we have 5 departments: hardware, software, assembly, repairs and maintenance, and HR. So these 3 are production departments and these 2 are service departments. So direct redistribution method takes an assumption that service department provides services only to production department. That is, there is no service from one service department to another service department. There is no service. This is what the assumption is. So what we do? Say for example, as per primary distribution, that is allocation plus apportionment, the total overhead is 100, 80, 60, 40 and 30. So it's simple. First, we can take any department. First, let's reapportion the cost of repairs and maintenance. Say for example, it is on the ratio 1:1:2. So we add 10, 10, 20, eliminate this 40 here. Now we reapportion the cost of human resource department. Say for example, we do it on 1:1:1 basis. So 10, 10, 10. Now we get the total overheads for the production department: 120, 100 and 90. This we divide it by a suitable basis, we get the overhead recovery rate. This we charge to cost object based on the actual basis. This is direct redistribution method. The assumption it takes is there is no service from one service department to another service department. Next we have the stepladder or non-reciprocal method. What it tells is one service department provides service to other service department, but other service department does not provide service to the previous department. So there is one-way service from one service department to another service department, but there is no reverse service. Say we have 2 departments, repairs and maintenance and HR. So what HR tells is, I give service to the hardware department, to the software department, to the assembly department. I also give service to the repairs and maintenance department. So if you want to recruit employees for the repairs and maintenance department, I do that service also. I do the selection, training and everything. But repairs and maintenance, it does the repairs and maintenance of only hardware, software and assembly. So it does not provide service to the HR department. So what do we do now? So we have the primary distribution. The one rule which we need to remember in stepladder or non-reciprocal method is the service department which gives service to maximum service department, we should reapportion its cost first. So here, human resource department gives service to HR department, gives service to one service department, but repairs and maintenance did not give service to any department. So first we'll reapportion the cost of HR department. So reapportionment of HR. This is 30. Assume it's distributed amongst 4 equally. So it's 7.5, 7.5, 7.5 and 7.5, and this becomes nil. And now we have the total overheads of repairs and maintenance at 47.5. We distribute it here. Say 15, 15, 17.5. Now we get the total overhead for production department. We take a suitable basis, get the overhead recovery rate, charge it and get the overhead per cost object. This is the stepladder or non-reciprocal method. Only one rule you have to remember: the service department which provides service to maximum service departments will have to reapportion it first. It's not maximum departments, it's maximum service departments. Say for example, we have S1 which provides service to 3 production departments plus 1 service department. We have S2 which provides service to one production department plus two service department, and we have S3 which provides service to one production department and no service department. Which one do we distribute first? If we take on total basis, it is total 4 departments, 3 departments and 1 department. And if you take only the service departments, we give it to 1, 2 and 0. So we'll have to first take service department 2. So when we take service department 2, it gives service to other departments, but the other departments don't give service to this department. So we distribute its cost and this cost becomes nil. Okay. Then we go to the next one, the service department 1, and then we go to the service department 3. That's how it happens. Now we have the third method, reciprocal method. So what does the reciprocal method tell? All service departments provide services inter se. That is, service department 1 provides services to service department 2 and service department 2 also provides service to service department 1. In our example, HR tells, I give service to repairs and maintenance department. If they want employees for repairs and maintenance department, I provide them that. So I give service to repairs and maintenance department. Repairs and maintenance department tells, if any equipment in the HR department is problematic, I help in repairing that. So I also give service to HR department. So both the service department provide services to each other. So now what do? We've got two methods. First is the trial and error or repeated distribution. Next is the mathematical method or simultaneous linear equation. We get the same answer by following both the methods. What do we do in trial and error? We go on distributing the overhead till the time it comes to a very nominal amount. And at the end, we get only overheads at the production department. In exam, if they have not specified how many cycles to do it for 3 cycles. And then at the end, distribute the entire overheads directly to the production department. How does it happen? See, this is the primary distribution of overheads. I've kept it the same. Now we'll do the reapportionment. First, I'll reapportion cost of repairs and maintenance. Assuming I'll do it in 1:1:1:1:1. So 40, I'll do it as 10, 10, 10, 10. Now we have the total departments in HR, including the reapportionment of repairs and maintenance at 40. Now I'll have to reapportion HR. I again assume I do it at 1:1:1:1. Again 10, 10. 10, 10 and 40. Now this one has become nil, but now we still have 10 rupees. Again we repeat the cycle. So at 1:1:1:1, the 10 rupee we do it at 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. Now we have 2.5. So for HR, we again do it, but this time what we do is, because the amount has become significantly smaller, we distribute it only to the production departments. So in the last step, what we do is, even if we have the service department, we only distribute it to the production departments only, because ultimately we want the total overhead at the service department to become nil. So we reduce 2.5 from here. We don't distribute anything here. This 2.5 will share it at, say for example, 0.8, 0.8 and 0.9. Based on this, we get the total overhead, we divide by a basis, we get overhead recovery rate, and then we charge the overheads to the cost object. So, blast from the past. What are certain things we have seen from the examination? If question does not specify how many cycles to do it for 3 cycles. So what is 1 cycle? This, once we reapportion for repairs and maintenance, once we reapportion for HR, this is called 1 cycle. This is called the 2nd cycle. And if the amount is still big, do it for the 3rd cycle, and at the end of 3rd cycle, distribute it only to the production departments, making the service department overheads nil. That's the first thing. Next thing where students generally make mistake is when we reapportion the overheads of second service department, what we have to do is we have to take the total overheads as the primary overheads plus distribution from other department. Here, distributed the service cost of repairs and maintenance. Now, when we are distributing the cost of human resources, not merely you have to take the primary distribution department, primary distribution plus distribution from other departments. That's the second thing. Do the last reapportionment, charge it only department. Third, when we do the last reapportionment, we charge it only to the, because ultimately we want the overhead at the service department to be nil. So when we're doing the final reapportionment, we won't charge it to the service department and we charge this amount entirely to the production department. So this is by trial and error method. We also have a simpler method, which is the mathematical method. So how do we do that? We've got the primary distribution at 100, 80, 60, 40 and 30. So we know the total overheads of repairs and maintenance department is 40 rupees from primary distribution, and we also have percentage allocation of HR department. So we take the total overhead in repairs and maintenance as X. X is equal to 40 plus percentage, assuming it as 1:1:1:1, that is 25%. We take the total overhead at HR department as Y. So we got the first equation. Now we'll get the second equation, that is total overhead at HR is equal to 30 plus percentage share of repairs and maintenance. We take the total overhead as Y is equal to 30 plus percentage, again we are taking it as 25% of X. So we've got two equations here. We substitute one in another, so we get X is equal to 40 plus 0.25 Y. Instead of Y we put 30 plus 0.25X. So while we substitute this, we get X is equal to 63.33 and Y is equal to 45.83. So what is this X? This is the total overheads in the service department, including share of the other department. So X was repairs and maintenance. Repairs and maintenance had 40 rupees from the primary distribution. So we'll also get 23.33 rupees as the percentage allocation from the HR department. Okay. So HR department's cost is 45.83. What does it mean? It means that we already have 30 rupees from the primary distribution. We'll also get some extra amount from the repairs and maintenance. Based on that, the total overhead comes to 45.83. So now what do we do with this? We have the primary distribution. So from here, we reapportion, say first, we reapportion cost of HR. So what we do is, there's 63.33. We distribute it equally. Say for example, 16, 32, 48. And then we do it so on. So again, 40, 63.33. Here again, we will have to put it 23.33 when we are distributing this amount here. So based on that, this entire amount becomes nil. The service department amount becomes nil. Would be department. We get the total overheads for the production department, give a suitable basis, get the overhead recovery rate and charge it to the cost object. Simple. So some important points from the exam perspective. First is creation of simultaneous linear equation. So we have to take the total overheads of departments as x and y. So we get x is equal to the primary distribution plus percentage of y. That is whatever percentage is allocated specifically to this of y, that is the other department's overhead. This is simultaneous equation. Second, we can use the simultaneous linear equation method only if we have two service department. If you have more than two service department, the simultaneous linear equation does not work and you will have to go to the trial and error method only. Next, in reapportionment, we have to deduct the full amount. So for repairs and maintenance, as per primary distribution, we got it 40 rupees. After the secondary distribution, we got the total overheads in the service department as 63.33. So when we are reducing it, we have to reduce the total amount from there. These are 3 points from the simultaneous linear equation method. So we've discussed 3 points. First, allocation, when cost is directly attributable to a production department. Next is apportionment, when cost is directly not attributable. So we take a basis based on which we distribute it to the departments. Then is reapportionment. Here what we do is the service department overhead, we transfer it to the production department. Why do we do it? Because service department overheads can be better linked to the production department, and from the production department they can be better linked to the product. So we have got 3 methods. First is direct redistribution method. Here we assume that there is no services between the service department. Next, we have the stepladder or non-reciprocal method. Here one service department gives service to another service department, but the other service department does not give service to the first service department. Then we have the reciprocal method, wherein both service departments give services inter se. So here we use either the trial and error method. What we do is we go on distributing until the amount becomes insignificant, and we have the mathematical equation. We create a simultaneous linear equation, and based on that we solve it. This works only if we have only 2 variables. So after the end of this, at the end of this, we get the total overheads only for the production department. So what happens at the end of reapportionment is the overhead at the service department becomes nil, and we would only be left with overheads in the production department. So say for example 5 crore, 3 crore and 2 crore. So in the service department, the overhead becomes nil. So now we've got the total overhead department wise. We will be having a certain basis. Say for example for production department 1, we take it based on material cost. Say material cost is 10 crore. So we get it at point for material cost. For production department 2, it is based on labor hours. Say for example we have 10 lakh labor hours. So we get it at 30 per labor hour. And for production department 3, we take it based on percentage of labor cost. Once we get the total overhead department wise, then it's simple. We got the overhead, we divide it by a basis, we get the overhead recovery rate, and based on the overhead recovery rate, we charge overhead to the cost object. Simple. Say for example, here we got the overheads. So it's overhead based on production department divided by basis. So for example, for hardware, we got it at 0.5 per rupee of material. For software, we got at rupees 30 per labor hour. And for assembly, we got at 0.2 per labor cost. So now we have a cost object. So we have to charge the overhead to the cost object. So now we charge the overhead to the cost object. Say for example, we have MI10. So we charge the overhead. So the hardware cost is 0.5 per material into, say for example, 10 crore worth of direct material was used. So it comes to 5 crore. Again, software was 30 per labor hour into 1 lakh labor hour. It's 3 crore. And assembly comes to 0.2 per labor cost into 1 crore labor cost, which comes to 20 lakh. So we get it at 8.2 lakh, 8.2 crore is the total overhead to manufacture MI phones, MI 10 phones in the year. And assuming we manufactured 1 crore phones in the year, we get the overhead rate at rupees 8.2 per mobile manufacturer. And this we charge to the prime cost, we get the total cost, we add profit, we get the selling price. So these are the 5 steps for departmental rate method. First, you have to get the total overheads. How do we get that? Allocation, apportionment, reapportionment. Based on that, we get the total overhead department wise. We divide by a suitable basis, we get the overhead recovery rate. And this overhead recovery rate, we charge overheads to the cost object. Simple. So we have discussed the entire concept of departmental rate method, the 5 steps, and how do we get the departmental rate, and based on that, how do we charge it to the cost object. There are few certain important things to be remembered from the exam perspective based on the mistakes students have committed. First thing is the treatment of direct material, direct labor, and direct expenses. So we know direct material, direct labor, and direct expenses forms part of the prime cost. And here we are calculating the amount of overheads. So is there a need to include direct material, direct labor, and direct expense in the overhead statement? So if you're doing it for the production department or for the service department. For the production department, it already forms part of prime cost. So there is no need to include it in overhead. But for service department, any cost in service department is an indirect cost to manufacture the product. Say for example, canteen. So in canteen, to get the food, we use the materials, direct materials, say rice. So for every person, the quantity of rice increases. For every increase in person, the quantity of rice increases. So if we just look standalone from the perspective of canteen department, it might seem like a direct material. But if we look at it from the perspective of product, we are manufacturing MI10. How much of rice do I want? There is no one-to-one association, right? So every item of cost in the service department is an indirect cost and it is overhead. So the direct material, direct labor, and direct expenses in the service department would also be treated as overheads. So all cost of service departments are overhead. So the cost will bifurcate into 2. So the total cost will bifurcate into 2. First we have the direct material, direct labor, direct expenses. Then we have the indirect material, indirect labor, indirect expenses. Indirect material, indirect labor, indirect expenses is anyways overhead, so it will be included in overhead. Direct material, direct labor, and direct expenses. For the production department, it forms part of prime cost. So it does not form part of overhead. But for the service department, all costs are indirect, so it forms part of overhead. That's the first thing. Next, for apportionment, we want certain basis. Okay. Say for example, question has given us the general overheads or sundry expenses or miscellaneous expenses. On what basis do we apportion this amongst the different departments? So what ICAI is considering is, ICAI consider these costs as employee related cost. So it apportions this cost based on either the number of employees or the labor hours or the labor cost. So if in exam we have general overheads or sundry expenses or miscellaneous expenses and we have to apportion them, you can use the number of employees, labor hours, or labor cost as the basis. Then for apportionment, we have the power cost, we have the light cost. There is a difference between power and light. Light is the general lighting and power is used for production in the machines. For lighting, we distribute it based on the number of light points generally. For power, the best thing to do is the number of machine hours used into the kilowatt hour or the horsepower the machine is using. Based on this ratio, we can apportion this. That would be the first thing. If this is not available, they would either give you the machine hours or the kilowatt hour. So based on this, we'll have to apportion the overheads. This is with the power and lighting. Then we have repairs, insurance, rate and taxes, and depreciation. All these are generally based on asset value. All these are generally based on asset value. Repairs, if the value of asset is less, the amount of repair is less. If the value of asset is more, the amount of repair would be more. So it is based on asset value. Insurance, we generally do it for the assets. Employee related insurance does not come here. Employee related insurance forms part of labor cost. So it goes to the labor cost. Here the only insurance we have is the asset related insurance. So that also depends on the basis of asset value. Depreciation again is based on asset value. Rent and taxes. Here it means the municipal tax paid for the property. So it is again based on asset value. Then if question gives us only taxes, what to consider? Question has given us only taxes. We consider them as the municipal tax or the property tax, and accordingly we distribute it based on asset value. So these are the important points to be remembered while doing apportionment. So we've discussed the 5 steps of departmental overhead. So we wanted the total overhead, but we wanted it for each production department. We divide it by basis, we would get the overhead recovery rate, and based on the overhead recovery rate, we would charge the cost to the cost object. And from here, we have the prime cost, we get the overhead, we get the total cost. Based on that, we determine the selling price. To get the total overhead for every production department, we first did allocation, wherein there was direct cost. Next, we did the apportionment for the common cost. Next, we did the reapportionment of service department cost to the production department, wherein we had direct redistribution method, stepladder method, and reciprocal method. In reciprocal method, we did the trial and error and the mathematical equation method. Now we'll discuss the final topic of the chapter, under absorption or over absorption of overheads. Here we'll discuss why the situation arises, what is under absorption and over absorption, and how to treat them in costing. So let's come to the first question, why the situation arises. Suppose the prime cost of manufacturing the product is rupees 5,000. So you're manufacturing a mobile phone. The prime cost of manufacturing it, say for example, is rupees 5,000. Again, overheads is unknown right now. So customer comes to the shop. He asks, how much is this mobile for? So you tell, I know the prime cost. I know how much profit I want. But because I don't know the overheads, I'm not in a position to tell you the selling price. You do one thing, you come next year. I'll give this phone to you next year. What will the customer do? He'll think you're mad. He'll go to another shop, right? So when the customer comes, we should be in a position to quote him a selling price, and to quote the selling price, we should have determined the cost. But to determine the cost, we know the prime cost, but overhead cannot be ascertained with 100% accuracy. So what we do in such a situation is we take estimated amount of overheads, we compare it with the basis, and based on that we calculate the overhead recovery rate. So that's how we do it. So overheads would mostly be calculated on an estimation basis. So at the end of the year, we will know what the actual overhead is. And there is every possibility that actual overhead is not equal to the estimated overhead. So when actual overhead is not equal to estimated overhead, the recovery would not be right. There would somewhere be an under or over recovery. We would have either recovered less or we would have recovered more. So this is the first reason why there will be under or over recovery. That is, we want to know the cost in the year, but overhead amount can be finally ascertained at the end of the year. So what we do is we take the amount of estimated overheads. So when we are not taking actual data, when we are taking estimated data, there is bound to be a difference. So that is the first reason why under or over recovery happens. So that is the first reason why under or over absorption happens. The second reason, so we got the overhead recovery rate as, say for example, 5 lakh we estimated would be our overheads, and we divided by 500 labor hours, which comes to 1000 per labor hour. So the first reason is we estimated it at 5 lakh, the actual overhead is 6 lakh. Second reason is the basis could also change. We thought we are going to use 500 labor hours, but in actual we use 650 labor hours. That's also possible. So this is another reason why under or over absorption happens. So to understand this concept, we'll have to know the meaning and difference of estimated overheads, absorbed overheads, and actual overheads. Estimated overheads is how much overheads we estimate to incur in a given period. Why do we use it? We use it to calculate overhead recovery rate. For overhead recovery rate, we want the estimated overheads divided by a basis. So in our example, it was 5 lakh divided by 500 labor hour, it was 1000 per labor hour. That was the first step. We estimate the overhead, and based on that we get the overhead recovery rate. Now, every time a labor is working, for every hour labor is working, we charge 1000 rupees to the cost. This keeps on happening. So day 1, labor has worked for 10 hours. So 10 hours into 1000, we charge it to the cost. Next day, it keeps on happening. So what we do is, for the actual hours worked, we keep on charging 1000 as the cost. So absorbed overhead is how much overhead we have actually charged to the product. Amount of overheads is actually charged to product is called absorbed overhead. How do we get it? We get it based on the overhead recovery rate into actual basis. So it's 1000 per labor hour. So if in the year, if I have worked for 10,000 hours, so I do it as 1000 per hour into 10,000 hours. So I get the amount. So for actual hours worked, for every hour worked, or for every actual basis, we keep on absorbing the overheads. And then actual overheads is the actual amount of overheads incurred. So estimated overhead, we estimate the amount of overhead at the beginning of the year to get the overhead recovery rate. Absorbed overhead happens throughout the year, that is as and when we use the basis. In the given example, it was labor hour. So as and when the labor works for an hour, we charge 1000 rupees to the product as overhead. This keeps on happening. And say for example, at the end of the year, the overhead absorbed is 1 lakh. That is the absorbed overhead. And actual overhead is the actual amount of overheads. This would be ascertained at the end of the year. This is the sum total of actual overhead costs incurred by the organization. Say for example, the actual overhead cost incurred is 1.2 lakh. So this we want only to get the overhead recovery rate. The difference between this is called under or over absorption. So we should have charged 1.2 lakh to the products actually, but we have charged only 1 lakh. So there is this difference. This difference is called under or over absorption of overheads. Next, when do we get under absorption and when do we get over absorption? Let's take 3 scenarios. First we have absorbed overheads, then we have the actual overheads, then let's reach at a conclusion. Assume the actual overheads at 1 lakh rupees. The absorbed overhead is 90,000, 1 lakh and 1.3 lakh. So the actual amount to be charged to the product is 1 lakh, but we have only charged 90,000. So what does that mean? We have charged less. So we have undercharged. So this is called as under absorption. That is, we have absorbed less than the actual overhead. So how do we get it? If absorbed overhead is less than actual overhead, then the difference is called as under absorption. If the absorbed overhead is 1 lakh and the actual overhead is also 1 lakh, then both are equal. It is called as full absorption. And if the actual overhead expenditure is 1 lakh and we have absorbed 1.3 lakh, we have absorbed more. That is called over absorption. So over absorption happens when the absorbed overhead is greater than the actual overhead incurred. Is this fine? There is another way to get it. Say prepare factory overhead account. So as and when on actual basis I incur the overhead, I go on debiting the expenses here. So this is the actual overhead cost incurred. Say for example, here it is 1 lakh. And every time a labor works, we keep on charging the amount to the product. That is, we keep on absorbing. So here we get the absorbed overhead. Say for example, it's 1.3 lakh. The actual overhead is 1 lakh. We have absorbed 1.3 lakh. The difference we get here, in this case 30,000, is called over absorption. If absorbed is more, it's called over absorption. If absorbed is less, it's called under absorption. So we have discussed why under or over absorption happens, because we won't have the actual overhead, so we take estimated overhead, and we won't be knowing the actual basis. That will also be estimated. So that's the reason why under or over absorption happens. Then we've seen what is under or over absorption. If absorbed overhead is more than actual overhead, it's called over absorption. If absorbed overhead is less than actual overhead, it is called under absorption. Now we have to see the treatment for under or over absorption. So we can do one of the three. Option 1 is we can carry forward the balance to the next year. Option 2 is transfer the amount to costing P&L. And option 3 is charge the amount using the supplementary rate. Carry forward to next year. It's very simple. Don't do anything. I'll give you a very simple example. Assume the actual overhead is 6 lakh. Absorbed overhead is 5 lakh. And the treatment is same for under as well as over absorption. So there is no difference in treatment. If it is under absorption also, we have the 3 methods. If it's over absorption also, we have the 3 methods. Suppose the actual overhead is 6 lakh and we have absorbed only 5 lakh. That means there is an under absorption of 1 lakh. Okay. So actual overhead of 6 lakh means it's the actual cost. Absorbed overhead is the cost actually charged to the product. The cost charged to the product. Okay, under absorption is a difference. So here what we do is do nothing. So if this year there is an under absorption, next year there might be an over absorption, and net effect becomes nil. So when it goes on for a long period, it gets adjusted itself. So there is no need to do anything, is what this concept tells. So it's very simple, do nothing philosophy. But what happens is, if you do nothing, so it impacts current year profit. It impacts next year's profit as well. Because current year, the actual cost is 6 lakh, but I've actually showed only 5 lakh. So I've undercast my cost. So I've increased my profit. So next year, to adjust this, what I would do is I would increase the cost, which would reduce my profit. So this cycle keeps on happening. So this is very practical, but this is generally not recommended. In exams, if question specifically asks to carry forward for next year, then do it. Next, we have transfer to costing P&L. When do we do this? We do this if the difference is small. Difference as in the difference between the actual overheads and absorbed overhead is small. Or the difference is due to any abnormal reason. Then we transfer the difference. We transfer the under absorption or over absorption to costing P&L account. What do you mean by difference is small? Whether 5,000 is small, 500 is small, 5 rupee is small, 5 lakh is small, 50 lakh is small. We generally see as the percentage of actual overhead cost. So the under absorption in our case was 1 lakh. So I compared it with the actual overhead of 6 lakh. I got it around 16.67%. 16.67% is not small. But if it was somewhere less than 1%, we would have treated it as small and directly charged the same to costing P&L. So when do we transfer the amount to costing P&L? If the difference is small, it is the percentage of under or over absorption to actual overhead is very small, or it is due to an abnormal reason, we would transfer it to costing P&L. So what happens if we transfer the amount to costing P&L? The current year's cost calculation would be wrong. Point number 1. But current year's profit calculation would be right. And from the future year, there is no impact, as the entire impact is nullified and set aside in this year only. So why would cost be wrong? Because in the cost, we have only shown 5 lakh as the overheads, but in actual it is 6 lakh. So we have not shown the entire cost. In the given example, we have undercast the cost. But herein, while calculating profit or loss, what do? 5 lakh is anyway shown as cost. The under absorption of 1 lakh would also be shown as cost, making the total cost, the total expense as 6 lakh. So that's how the profit becomes right. So the cost calculation would be wrong, but the profit would get adjusted because the difference amount is going to the costing P&L, and that's where the adjustment happens. So the profit would be right. So there is no impact for the upcoming years. If we are just carrying forward the amount, the cost was wrong, the profit was wrong, even there was an impact for future year. If you are transferring it to costing P&L, the cost will be wrong, the profit would be right, and there is no impact for the upcoming years. So there are 3 different ways to treat the under or over absorption. First thing is to carry forward the balance to the upcoming year, that is, do nothing. Second thing is to transfer the amount to costing P&L, that is, when the amount is either minimal or it is due to abnormal reason. Now we'll discuss the third method, that is to charge the under or over absorption using the supplementary rate. So when do we use this? So when do we use this? We use this if the difference is substantial or it is a genuine increase in cost. If the difference is minimal, we transfer it to costing P&L. If it is due to abnormal reason, we transfer it to costing P&L. But if the difference is substantial, we charge using the supplementary overhead rate. If it is a genuine increase in cost, we charge using the supplementary overhead rate. Let's discuss this with the help of an example. Suppose the absorbed overhead is 5 lakh, the actual overhead is 6 lakh. That gives us the under absorption of 1 lakh rupees. So if we tell the absorption, if we tell that the overheads absorbed is 5 lakh, what does this mean? It is the overhead which is charged to the products. So how do we do this? Suppose we've taken the basis as labor hours. So what do we mean when we say overhead absorbed is 5 lakh? So we multiplied the overhead recovery rate with the actual basis. Say the actual basis is labor hours. That means for every hour labor is working, we were charging the amount as overhead to the cost of the product. Say the overhead recovery rate was 1000 rupees. That means for every hour labor was working, we were charging 1000 rupees as overhead cost. So if labor is working, he would be engaged in manufacture process, right? So if labor is working, he would have been engaged in manufacturing process, right? So if labor is working, for every hour labor is working, we are charging 1000 rupees as overhead cost. So if labor is working, he would have manufactured the goods. The goods would be either completed the production, that is finished goods, or it would be a work in progress. Again, the finished goods would have been either sold or unsold. So if it's sold, it forms part of cost of goods sold. If it's unsold, it will be in closing stock of finished goods. And if it's work in progress, it would also be in closing stock of work in progress. So the total amount of absorbed overhead of 5 lakh is distributed amongst these three accounts, that is cost of goods sold, cost of finished goods, and the work in progress. So now what we need to do is this under absorption should also be distributed to these three departments. So what are the three areas to which under or over absorption would be distributed? First is if the finished goods is complete. So if it's sold, we transfer it to cost of goods sold. If it's unsold, it will be in closing stock of finished goods. If it's a work in progress, it would be in closing stock of work in progress. So how do we do this? So we've realized that we have to charge it to closing stock of finished goods, closing stock of work in progress, or cost of goods sold. But how do we charge it? Question might give us either the rupee value, or question might give us the units. Let's take an example to understand it better. Suppose question gives us rupee value. We know that the under absorption is 1 lakh in both the cases. Suppose question tells the cost of goods sold is 5 lakh, the closing stock of finished goods is 3 lakh, and the closing stock of work in progress is 2 lakh. So based on this, we will have to now get the supplementary overhead rate and charge the under absorption to the products. So how do we do this? So the under absorption is 1 lakh, has to be distributed amongst 5 lakh plus 3 lakh plus 2 lakh, that is 10 lakh. So the supplementary rate would be 0.1 per rupee, or it would be 10% of cost. So the supplement rate would be 0.1 per rupee, or it would be 10% of cost. So how do we charge it to the three accounts? It is cost of goods sold, closing stock of finished goods, and closing stock of work in progress. So here we had 5 lakh into 10%, which give us 50,000. 3 lakh into 10% give us 30,000, and 2 lakh into 10% give us 20,000. This is how we distributed 1 lakh amongst the finished goods sold, finished goods unsold, and closing stock of work in progress. Clear till now? Again, when we have the under absorption of 1 lakh, what we could have done is we could have directly distributed in the ratio of 5:3:2. We could have directly got the amount. But while we are attempting an exam, ICAI wants us to calculate the rate first. ICAI wants us to calculate the supplementary rate first, and then using the supplementary rate, charge it to these three areas. So the first step should be to calculate the supplementary rate, and next would be using the supplementary rate, we have to charge it to finished goods sold, finished goods unsold, and work in progress. If question gives us the number of units, say for example, cost of goods sold, that is finished goods sold, finished goods unsold, and work in progress. Units are 5,000, 3,000, and 4,000. Here the catch is work in progress is not 100% complete. So we cannot take this total of 12,000 because here work in progress is not complete. So what we do is we calculate the equivalent number of complete units. So goods sold would be 100% complete. Finished goods in closing stock would also be 100% complete. Say question tells that work in progress is 50% complete. So based on this, we get the equivalent number of units. It is 5,000, 3,000, and 4,000 into 50% is 2,000. So this gives us 10,000 equivalent units. So now how do we charge? So we have the under absorption of 1 lakh, which would be distributed amongst the equivalent units of 10,000, which gives rupees 10 per equivalent unit. So for the finished goods, we have 5,000 units which are 100% complete, and we have 10 per equivalent unit. This gives us 50,000. For the closing stock of finished goods, we had 3,000 into 100% complete, which gave us the equivalent unit, and 10 per equivalent unit. This is 30,000. For the work in progress, we have 4,000 units, but they are just 50% complete, which gives us an equivalent of 2,000 units. And for every equivalent unit, the supplementary rate is 10. So this gives 20,000. This is how we distribute the under or over absorption to the finished goods which are sold, finished goods which are not sold and in the closing stock, and to work in progress which is in closing stock. So this brings us to end of the chapter overhead. First, we have discussed the relevance of this chapter. Why is overhead important? To set the selling price, we want the right cost. To get the cost, we want overhead, and overhead actual would not be available. So we'll have to estimate the best possible amount of overhead to be charged to every product. Then we came to 3 methods. First one was single rate method, wherein we had the total overhead divided by basis, the overhead recovery rate we would charge to the cost object. Then we had the departmental rate method, wherein instead of taking the total overhead, we took overhead based on production department, and then we had the activity based costing. Next, we came to the 5 steps in the departmental rate method. So in departmental rate method, we want the total overhead, but for each production department divided by basis, we would get the overhead recovery rate, we would charge it to the cost object and get the overhead per object. So to get the total overhead for production department, we had 3 steps. First one was allocation, next was apportionment, next one was reapportionment. For reapportionment, we had 3 methods. First was a direct redistribution, second one was stepladder, and third one was reciprocal. In reciprocal, we had simultaneous linear equation and trial and error method. This was the departmental rate method. Next, we came to under or over absorption. Here we discussed why it arises, what is under or over absorption. The absorbed overhead is greater than the actual overhead, it is over absorption. If the absorbed overhead is less than actual overhead, it is called under absorption. And we also seen its treatment in books. First thing is to carry forward to next year, that is do nothing. Second thing is to transfer the difference costing P&L, that is if the amount is minimal or if it is due to an abnormal reason. And the third thing, to use the supplementary rate and charge it to finished goods sold, that is cost of goods sold, finished goods unsold, that is the closing stock of finished goods, and work in progress, that is the closing stock of work in progress. So now let's begin with the new chapter, activity based costing. This chapter is just an extension of the chapter overheads. We discussed there are 3 methods of charging overheads. Activity based costing is one of them. One important note, this chapter is only applicable for the CA Inter, that is new syllabus students. For the old syllabus students, this chapter is not applicable. So you need not watch the lectures from now on. This chapter is very important from the exam perspective, and every attempt there is at least one 10-mark question. So every attempt, if we have a look at it, there is at least one 10-mark question. So undoubtedly it falls in the category A chapter. Also, there is a lot less to learn here because the entire background is set in the chapter overheads. We just have to dwell further to extract what activity based costing is. So let's begin activity based costing. Let's first set our foundation right. So let's first set our foundation right. Suppose we are manufacturing the phone MI10. We know the prime cost of manufacturing the phone as 5,000 rupees. Now we want to know how much is the overhead to be charged so that we get the total cost, and based on the total cost, we determine the selling price. So how do we get overhead to the particular cost object? We took the overhead, compared it with a suitable basis, and based on that, charge the overhead to the cost object. So there are three methods of charging overheads. First is single rate or blanket rate method. Here what we did, we took the total overheads of the organization, that is total overhead of 10 crore. We compared it with a suitable basis, say for example labor hour, and based on that, we charged the overhead to the cost object. Simple. Next, we went to the departmental rate method. Here, we did not take the total overhead of 10 crore. We wanted the overhead for every production department. Say production department A is 5 crore, production department B is 3 crore, production department C is 2 crore. So we got the overhead for every production department, and this overhead we compared it with a suitable basis. We got the overhead recovery rate, and based on the overhead recovery rate, we charged overhead to the cost object. This was the second method. Now we have come to activity based costing. So it is even more detailed. Departmental rate method is more detailed than single rate method. Activity based costing is even more detailed than the single rate and departmental rate method. Here we link the overhead cost to the relevant activity because of which the cost is incurred, and based on this we charge the overhead amount to the cost object. So needless to say, it is very detailed and gives us the best estimate of cost. Say for example, we have the total overheads of Xiaomi as 10 crore for the year. We don't want the total overheads. We don't even want the overhead department wise. We want the overhead activity wise. So I've created an example, and based on this, let's discuss it further. So we've got the material ordering cost of 10 lakhs. So what is it based on? Material ordering cost is incurred every time we order the material. So it is based on number of orders made. Assume the number of orders made is 1 lakh orders. So we get the rate as rupee 10 per order placed. Then we have the material handling cost. This is again, I've kept the amount same just for simplicity. Suppose the material handling cost is 10 lakh rupees. What is it based on? It is based on quantity of material handled. If you've handled more weight of material, the cost would be more. If it's less, the cost would be less. Say for example, we've handled 1 lakh kg of materials. So it would again be rupee 10 per kg of material handled. Now we've got the storage of raw materials. It is again an overhead cost. So what is it based on? The storage cost is dependent on how much area the goods consume in a godown. So it is based on area or square feet consumed. So if we have a total of 1 lakh square feet, then it comes to 10 lakh divided by 1 lakh square feet, rupee 10 per square feet. So this was it with the raw materials. We had to order the materials, we had to handle them, and we had to keep them in the warehouse. Next, conversion. For conversion, we have to set up the machine before we actually manufacture. Then we have to clean the machine and the workspace, and once the finished goods is produced, we'll have to inspect the goods and store the finished goods. So I've all taken those overhead basis as 10 lakh rupees. So what is machine setup based on? It is based on number of setups we do. So once I do a machine setup, it costs me 10 rupees. 10 times I do it, it costs me 10 into 10, 100 rupees. That's how the cost is incurred. So 10 lakh, and assume it's 1 lakh setups. So it gives us 10 per machine setup. And daily cleaning, what is it based on? It is based on the hours spent. So if it's based on cleaning hours, say for example, we have spent 1 lakh hours on cleaning, so it will be 10 per cleaning hour. And inspection, what is the inspection cost based on? It is based on the number of tests conducted or number of inspections made, or it can also be based on number of goods which we have inspected. Say for example, now we take it based on number of inspections made. Assume we've made 1 lakh inspections in the year, so we get it at rupee 10 per inspection. And again, storage of finished goods, it is again based on the area or the square feet which it consumes. So assume it's 1 lakh square feet, so it will be 10 per square feet. So this way, we break the total overheads into different activities, and for every activity, we link it with a suitable basis based on which the cost is incurred. So that's how we bifurcate the total overheads. So the total of all these overheads, now I've taken only few. So when I do the total of all these overheads, there will be a lot more. So when I do a total of all these overhead, it finally comes to 10 crore. So when I do a total of all these overhead on a gross basis, it would match with the total overheads of the company. That's what we are doing, right? We see the total overheads of the company. We are breaking it into different activities. From there, we see how much is the overhead per activity. So from total overhead, we came to overhead per activity. Now, we link it with the suitable basis based on which this cost is driven. So when we divide this overhead with this basis, we get the activity cost driver rate, that is the recovery rate. So far, so good. So far, it's clear. Now, suppose we are manufacturers of MI10. We know that the direct material cost is 3,000 rupees, the direct labor is 500 rupees, and the direct expense is 1500. So the prime cost is 5,000. Now we want to know the total overheads incurred to manufacture 1 unit of MI10. If we get that, we get the total cost, we add profit, we determine our selling price. So how do we get overhead as per activity based costing? So we make a statement to calculate the overhead cost per unit manufactured. In our case, it was per mobile manufactured. So we have all the activities, and then we see how much of activity is actually consumed, and we multiply it by the relevant driver. So we've got the material ordering cost. It was 10 per order, and say in a year we've placed 10,000 orders. So it comes to 1 lakh. Again, material handling cost, 10 per kg handled into 10,000 kgs. It again comes to 1 lakh. Material storage, 10 per square feet into 10,000 square feet, 1 lakh. I've kept the amounts same just for simplicity and to make the calculations easy. So we go on doing it for every activity. We get the total overhead. Say for example, the total overhead comes to 1 crore. So what is this total amount? We get the total overhead to manufacture all units of MI10 for the year. So this is for all units of MI10. So what do we do to get it per unit? We divide it by the number of units. Say for example, units of MI10 manufactured in the year are 10,000. So we get the overhead cost as 1,000 per unit. So we got the overhead cost as 1,000 per unit. We charge it here, 5,000 plus 1,000. We got the total cost at 6,000. We add the profit, and that's how we determine our selling price. Simple. So we've got a good feel of what activity based costing is. Now let's see the steps to be followed to get the overhead based on activity based costing method. So we've learned that when we divide the overhead by a suitable basis, we get the overhead recovery rate. So if we do the total overheads of the company divided by a basis, we get it based on single rate. We get the overhead for every production department divided by a basis, we get the departmental rate method. And now if we get the overhead activity wise and divided by a basis, we'll get the overhead recovery rate as per activity based costing. So far so good. Now let's develop the steps for activity based costing from the 5 steps of departmental rate method. So on the left hand side, we've got the departmental rate method, and on the right hand side, I have the activity based costing. So what is the main thing we do? We get the overhead, we compare it with the suitable basis, we get the overhead recovery rate, and based on the overhead recovery rate, we charge overhead to the cost object. So we've already learned the 5 steps in departmental rate method. So what are all the departments in the departmental rate method? We bifurcate the departments between production department and service department. In activity based costing, we bifurcate the activities as primary activities and support activities. So primary are the main activities, support activities are the ones which support the primary activities. That's what we do in activity based costing. So in departmental rate method, how we used to get the total overheads? Total overhead for every production department. We followed 3 steps, right? First, we used to do allocation of direct overheads. Then we used to do apportionment of common overheads. Then we used to do a reapportionment of service department overhead to the production department. We are doing the same in activity based costing as well. First, we'll do the allocation of overheads to every activity. Then we'll do apportionment. Then if there are common costs which are to be spread across different activities, we do apportionment. Then we have the overhead cost for the support activities. We want to transfer it from support activities to primary activities. This one would be done through reapportionment. So what is the final outcome of allocation, apportionment and reapportionment? We get the total overhead for production departments. And what is the total outcome of these 3 steps in activity based costing? We get the total overhead activity wise. That is, we get it for all the primary activities, right? Then what we used to do, we used to compare it with a suitable basis. So when we would compare the overhead with the suitable basis, we would get the overhead recovery rate. Same thing we are doing. We've got the overhead activity wise, we compare it with the basis, we get the overhead recovery rate. Simple. Only thing is the names we use here have changed. So the total overhead activity wise, we call it by the name activity cost pool. The basis due to which cost changes, we call it as activity cost driver. And the overhead recovery rate in activity based costing, we call it as activity cost driver rate. So what's the general formula? Overhead recovery rate is equal to overhead divided by basis. So what do we call them in activity based costing? Overhead recovery rate is called by the term activity cost driver rate, and overheads we call by the name activity cost pool. That is the total cost of activity, and the denominator, that is basis, we call by the name activity cost driver. That is, what is that factor that drives the cost of activity? So we get the total overhead, compare it with the basis, we get the activity cost driver rate. Simple. And after getting the overhead recovery rate, what we used to do was, we used to charge the overhead to the cost object. Here also it's the same. Based on the activity cost driver rate, we would charge overhead to the cost object. Simple. We had the 5 steps of departmental rate method. Based on the same, we've developed the steps to charge overhead to the cost object as per activity based costing. First, we get the total overhead activity wise. How do you do that? We do allocation, then apportionment, then do the reapportionment. Then we compare it with the suitable basis to get the overhead recovery rate. So what do we call overhead recovery rate in activity based costing? We call it the activity cost driver rate. And what do we call the total overhead for activity? We call it the activity cost pool. And what do we call the basis? We call it the activity cost driver rate. So activity cost driver rate is equal to activity cost pool divided by activity cost driver. So we've got the recovery rate. Based on this, we charged the overhead to the cost object. Simple. So this is the format of solving questions of activity based costing. First, we'll bifurcate the activities between primary and support activities. We'll do the allocation, we'll do the apportionment, we'll do the reapportionment. This gives us the total overhead activity wise. We call it activity cost pool. So what we do in reapportionment? Is nullify the amount in support activity and transfer it to the primary activity. So we've got the activity cost pool, we divide it by a basis, that is activity cost driver. We get the activity cost driver rate, and based on this, we charge overhead to the cost object. See, we have activity based costing in CA Inter as well as CA Final. For the CA Inter level, generally the allocation, apportionment and reapportionment are not separately asked. What question does is, it gives us the activity cost pool. It also gives us the activity cost driver. All we have to do is, we have to link it to the relevant driver, get the activity cost driver rate, and based on this, we have to charge overhead to the cost object. So there is no need for us to discuss all these three steps in very detail, at least for the Inter level. So with this, we've ended the chapter activity based costing. Believe me, if you've understood overhead thoroughly, activity based costing is very easy. It's just an extension, and in exams we get questions of 10 marks in every attempt. So it is a very scoring too. So we've learned all three methods: the single rate, the departmental rate and the activity based costing. So after learning all these three methods, we've got some golden rules for overheads and activity based costing chapter. This is relevant for all the three methods. Let's discuss that. The rule number 1, the prime cost per unit will be same in all three methods. So what are these three methods for? So we've got the single rate method, the departmental rate method and activity based costing. What are these three methods for? They are for charging overhead to the cost object. So the prime cost per unit would be the same in all three methods. There would be no change in the prime cost. Rule number 1. Say for example, we are manufacturing MI10. Our prime cost was 5,000 rupees. So it would be 5,000 rupees in all the three cases. Cool. Second, the total overhead cost will be the same in all three methods. For example, in our case, we've taken the total overhead as 10 crore rupees. So if we are following the single rate method, we just take 10 crore divided by a basis. If we follow the departmental rate method, what we do is 10 crore, we split it between the departments. Say production department 1 is 5 crore, production department 2 is 3 crore, production department 3 is 2 crore. But the total of overhead should match with the total overhead, because it's logical, right? So when we are bifurcating it between the departments, the total should match with the total. That's how it works, right? And even in activity based costing, the total overhead is 10 crore and we have, say for example, 100 activities. So if we do the total of overhead for 100 activities, it should match with the total overhead. That's the second rule. First rule is prime cost per unit would be the same. Second cost is total overhead cost, not the overhead per unit. Total overhead cost would also be the same. The third rule is, if company manufactures only a single product, then the total cost and overhead as per all the three methods will be the same. What is this? Let's discuss this. Say for example, this is as per single rate, this is as per departmental rate, and this is as per activity based costing. So the prime cost is 5,000. And now we have to charge overhead to the cost object. The overhead is 10 crore and the units we manufacture is 1 lakh. So the overhead per unit would be from 1 lakh, 10 lakh, 1 crore and 10 crore. It's 1,000 per unit. So if we are doing as per single rate method, we will charge 1,000 per unit. If you are doing as per departmental rate method, we split it between the department, but ultimately it is getting charged to only that single output. So it would again be 1,000 per unit only. And if you're doing as per activity based costing also, it would again be 1,000 per unit. See, if the total overhead is the same and we only have one output, then the overhead per unit should also be the same, right? If you have multiple outputs, then there is a possibility that the total overhead may be split in different proportion in the three different methods. But if you have only one output, and we know this total overhead of 10 crore has to be distributed ultimately to this cost object, then there is no way out. It has to come out in the exact same way, right? So if the company is manufacturing only a single product, it does not matter if it is following the single rate method, the departmental rate method, or the activity based costing method. So the overhead per unit and the total cost would be the same in all the three methods. Fine. So the three rules: first is prime cost per unit will be the same, second is total overhead will be the same, third is if the company is manufacturing only a single output, then the overhead per unit and the total cost per unit will be the same in all the three methods. Cool. Now let's just take a question and see how ICAI is asking questions from this chapter in the examination. From the exam perspective, ICAI never asks a standalone question from activity based costing. It always clubs it with the single rate or departmental rate method and then asks to calculate cost as per activity based costing. So typical question would be, they give the prime cost, they give overhead data, and they ask calculate total cost as per departmental rate method and also calculate the total cost as per activity based costing method and then compare. That's what we are supposed to do. So this is a question from RTP May 21. Almost every question would be on similar lines. So let's get a feel of what the question is and how we should proceed ahead. So there are three products. Okay, they've given the production sales, they've given the selling price, they've given the direct cost. What is direct cost? It's the prime cost. Then they've given the R's in machine department, they've given the R's in assembly department, then they've given the overhead expense for the year. So they've given in machine department it's 73.6 lakh, in assembly department it's 55 lakh. The total would come to 70, 120, 120, 128.6 lakh. This is the total overhead. Okay, so then they've given the basis for apportionment. So they've given for machine department it's based on machine hours, for assembly department it's based on labor hours. So which method are they following here? Is it a single basis? No, it is more than one basis. And they've given department wise. So here they are following the departmental rate method. Okay. Then they've given a detailed study of activities. Okay, so they've given the cost pool and the cost driver. So this is the cost pool for machine servicing. They've given the amount and they've also given the driver. See, it's very simple. They've given the cost pool, they've given the driver. What do we have to do to get the activity cost driver rate? Activity cost pool 64.4 lakh divided by 9.2 lakh hours. We get it at 7 per machine hour. Simple. Same we have to follow for all these things, right? And then we'll have to see the total of overhead as per activity based costing. Just for our understanding, it's 64.4 lakh plus 44 lakh plus 9 lakh plus 7.2 lakh plus 4 lakh. It is again 128.6 lakh. So if you had to look at the three golden rules, first was prime cost per unit will be same in all three. The direct cost per unit is same in all three methods. Second is total overhead would be the same, that is 128.6 lakh and 128.6 lakh. And third was if the company is manufacturing only a single unit, and that is not applicable here. And they've given estimate of activities also. They're asking the product wise profit statement using absorption costing method and activity based costing method. This is the question of RTP May 21. So it's simple. So what do we want? The product wise profit statement. So how do we get the profit statement? So first we get the total cost, then we compare it with the selling price, we get the profit. Simple. How do we get the total cost? We have the prime cost per unit. They've given us the prime cost per unit. They've given us the prime cost per unit. And then we add overhead. So we get the total cost. We do it on a total basis because they want us the total profit statement. Right? So So how do we do it in the departmental rate method? They've given us the total overhead of 128.6 lakh, and then they've given the machine department is apportioned based on the machine hours. So 73.6 lakh would be divided by machine hours. So what is the machine hours? They've given it's machine hours per unit they've given. So 3 hours per unit into number of units. This would give us the total machine hours. And here the number of units and the labor hours per unit would give us the total labor hours. So based on this, we get the overhead recovery rate, and based on the overhead recovery rate, we charge it based on the actual hours we've used in the department. So that's how we get the total cost as per departmental rate method. Now coming to activity based costing method. So we've got the cost pool, we've got the cost driver, so we got the activity cost driver rate. Now we have to charge this overhead cost to the cost object. For that, we need to have the product wise bifurcation of how many times the activity is being incurred. So here we want the machine hours. So how do we get it based on? We get it based on machine hours per unit into number of units. Here it is a direct labor hours. How do we get it based on? So we get it based on direct labor hours per unit into number of units. Here you want the machine setups. How do we get up this setup number of setups? Question has itself given what the total number of setups is. Next we want the number of customer orders. That is also explicitly given in the question. Then we have the purchase order, that is also explicitly given in the question. Based on that, we can solve this. Believe me, activity based costing is one of the easiest and scoring chapters in the examination. So we have discussed overhead chapter and activity based costing. Hope it was helpful to you. Go back home, have a look at the questions, make summary notes for yourself, and get ready to rock your exams. See you soon with another topic. Thank you so much for listening to me.